Today is Saturday, April 8th. It has been an unprecedented week in American history. The world watched as former President Trump was arrested on 34 felony charges. Many of his critics say it's about time, while his supporters, and even some of his critics, say the case is a sham. But what do the legal and political experts say about all of it? Today, you'll hear from a Republican analyst about what he thinks this means for Trump and the rest of the Republican Party. But first, what are these charges really about? Legal expert Jamil Jaffer helps break it down for us. He's a lawyer and the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University. His credentials also include time spent as a White House associate counsel for President George W. Bush. Both guests will help to explain and analyze this current case and what could be coming next for Trump. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. Jamil Jaffer, thank you so much for coming on the Newsworthy.
Erica, thanks for having me.
So let's start with the big picture. We know this is unprecedented for any president, former or current, to face criminal charges. How big of a deal is it, in your opinion?
It's unprecedented in a couple of ways. Obviously, it's never happened, but the political implications of what's going on here and how it will affect the political calculus going into the elections is huge. And as a general matter, as a prosecutor, you try to stay out of politics, you try to keep a case out of that space. Maybe it was inevitable here. I think we can figure out whether that's the case or not. But certainly, there's no doubt that this case will become the centerpiece of this political campaign through 2024, regardless of what happens. I mean, the DA in New York could drop this case tomorrow, and this case will be at the heart of the rest of the presidential election all the way through November 2024.
There are 34 felony charges. What are prosecutors accusing former President Trump of, and how serious are they?
The core claims made, or the core violations of law laid out in the indictment, are falsifying business records, right? Business records of the Trump organization, the checks that were cut to Stormy Daniels and others, essentially to keep them quiet during the presidential election. But those claims are misdemeanor charges. Falsifying business records is not a felony offense, and yet he's been charged with felonies. The question is, how is the prosecutor bootstrapping into a felony? And it turns out that if those misdemeanors were conducted in an effort to achieve another crime or to avoid another crime, essentially to avoid discovery of another crime, you might be able to charge them as felonies. And that's what's happening here. The question is, though, what's the underlying crime? And on that question, the indictment itself is silent. And so you had the Manhattan DA throw out some ideas about what it could be. He said, look, I wasn't required by law to do that. That, of course, raises questions about if you're the defendant, how do you know what to defend yourself against if you don't know what the underlying charge is? I mean, you don't have to be a fan of Donald Trump to have these concerns. I mean, you've seen a lot of law professors out there now, a lot of legal experts saying this case is full of holes and challenges for the DA, Alvin Bragg, not to mention all the political overlay. And why, if there are federal election campaign charges, right, why didn't the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, bring charges? Why haven't the U.S. attorneys bring charges? Why didn't the former DA, Cy Vance, bring charges, right? There's a lot of questions here. And of course, Donald Trump and his campaign and his team, his legal team, are making the point this is all political.
So paying hush money isn't necessarily a crime on its own, right? Can you further explain the difference between that on its own and what Trump has been charged with?
Paying somebody to agree to enter into a non-disclosure agreement, as a general matter, is something you can do. Companies, when people leave companies all the time, say, hey, we'll give you your, severance payment if you agree to enter into a non-disclosure, agree not to sue us, so we won't sue you. And, there are mutual promises made. That happens all the time. Now, does it happen with a former stripper in the case of a alleged affair during the course of a presidential campaign? No, that's not the typical scenario, right? Does that make it any more illegal? We don't know. Probably not. But, unless there's a campaign finance problem, unless he didn't do things right under the tax laws, or unless he lied, to a federal or, or a state investigating official, or if he did falsify these business records, right, and that falsification was designed to mislead or effectuate another crime, right? Those are things that you can charge, but they're not typically charged. And so I think a lot of people are scratching their heads saying, man, this is not that slam dunk case. Are you really going to go up against the Teflon Don in the court of public opinion at a time when he's running for president where it's highly politically charged? and try to win on what looked like maybe not the strongest charges of all.
Do you expect this to go to trial? And if Trump were to be convicted, do you expect him to face any prison time?
I mean, look, I don't know if you're the Manhattan DA, how you can bring these charges after this months of thinking about it and trying to decide and won't he, and then you bring the charges and then not pursue the case, right? Not go to trial. I can't. I mean, look, Donald Trump is not pleading out. I don't see any way Donald Trump cuts a deal. That means this case probably goes to trial unless the judge gets rid of it on not enough legal basis for the charges. And so when it goes to trial, how, that's a different question. But I don't see how these two sides back down at this point.
And do you expect Trump to face any prison time?
Am I going to take a bet on Donald Trump getting convicted by the Manhattan DA? No. But if he does get convicted, I think they have no choice but to seek jail time. And, these are all, I mean, it's so hypothetical at this point because we don't know a ton about the case. What we do know doesn't suggest it's very strong. And Donald Trump has been really good at getting out of these things time and time and time again. So that's a hard question, Erica.
And in the meantime, even just hours after the charges were read in court, Trump gave a speech at Mar-a-Lago where he criticized the judge and the prosecutor and other investigations against him. Do you expect any sort of gag order, or what are the implications of such a prominent figure talking about the case while it's going on the campaign trail to the public?
He obviously has a First Amendment right, but he's also a presidential candidate. Man, you imagine the First Amendment litigation going on in courts if the judge tries to impose a gag order and Donald Trump tries to talk about it at a campaign rally. Like, those are real, actual American core values running right up into each other.
There are other investigations against Trump still pending. Now that he's been formally indicted in New York, could there be an impact on those cases, or what do you expect from them in general?
It's interesting because there may actually be more pressure to bring charges now that are more solid. There are sort of three other big investigations going on, right, Erica? One is a state investigation in Georgia about whether the president used improper influence to influence a Georgia state official or the Georgia state legislature, right, to certify or not certify the results of the election. Then you've got the classified materials that were found at Mar-a-Lago. And then, of course, you've got the January 6th insurrection. Every prosecutor, whether it's Alvin Bragg or the prosecutor in Georgia or the federal prosecutors of the Justice Department, they have prosecutorial discretion. You don't bring every case that you can make possibly. You bring the ones that you think are the right ones to bring at the right time, set the right precedent, and where you have the facts to prove it to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. That may be where Alvin Bragg has fallen down, is on a question of exercising his own prosecutorial discretion.
So how might this criminal case against Trump influence his chances for president in 2024? Still ahead, hear from conservative commentator Scott Jennings. He's a political contributor to CNN and a longtime political confidant to Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. He also owns a public affairs firm called Run Switch PR and teaches a class about modern American political campaigns at Harvard. Scott Jennings shares why he thinks this case is motivated more by politics than criminal justice, though why he also doesn't think Trump should be let off the hook just yet. But first, a quick break for our sponsor. In addition to your daily news roundups, if you are looking for a roundup of great candidates to hire in your business, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. So don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Sponsor a job and boom, Instant Match shows you candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your job description immediately after you post. And yes, it's important that the people you are looking for you in the same place. Well, get this, 81% of U.S. online job seekers search for jobs on Indeed each month, according to ComScore. Indeed knows that when you're doing everything for your company, you can't afford to overspend on hiring. So visit Indeed.com/newsworthy to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/newsworthy. Indeed.com/newsworthy. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Okay, now to my conversation with conservative commentator Scott Jennings. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the Newsworthy again.
Thank you.
So first, as a Republican analyst, what was your immediate reaction to learning about 34 felony charges against the former president?
I think the case is ridiculous. I think it's weak. I've listened to a lot of legal and political commentators that I respect all across the spectrum, from liberal to conservative. And there seems to be a broad attitude that this case is just not very good or very strong. And it's a bit of a mess. And so I think it has more to do with politics than it has to do with the law.
And you're saying that as someone who at the midterms was saying, maybe it's time to move away from President Trump.
Yeah, look, I know a lot of Republicans who don't want to vote for Donald Trump again, who think the party should move on from Donald Trump, who think this indictment is ridiculous, and who know that this is going to probably help Donald Trump with Republicans, at least in the short term. That has nothing to do with future legal issues that he may be facing. But on this specific case and this specific matter, most Republicans I know, regardless of where they stand on Trump, are really all unified on the idea that this is kind of dumb, frankly.
And yet, because it is the first time a president has faced criminal charges, how big of a deal do you think it is?
It's really kind of been a boon to Trump, at least politically in the short term. I mean, I'm sure he didn't enjoy being indicted. I'm sure he didn't enjoy being drug into court there in New York City. He's not due back in court until December the 4th. This case is going to take so long to unravel that I guess it's hard to project a long-term impact. But the short term, it's been obviously a net political positive for Trump.
And maybe it is way too early to even ask this, but let's say Trump wins the primary and yet the trial stretches on for a long time. Maybe Trump's even convicted. Do you think this could ultimately impact the general election for the president?
Well, one thing we know about Donald Trump for sure is that, and we have empirical evidence, is that independents really don't like Donald Trump. He's toxic for independent voters. And they, of course, in most cases, decide American general elections, especially presidential elections. We found out in the midterms last year that even though Joe Biden was unpopular, his policies were unpopular, that independent voters still sided with Democrats because they thought the Republican Senate candidates were simply too close to Donald Trump. And now you've got this polling out that says most independents say that, yes, there was at least some political motivation to this indictment, but they don't care because they still approve of the indictment, according to the CNN SSR survey that I've looked at. So you've got independent voters telling us time and again that they're done with Donald Trump. Republicans need to think about this during our nominating contest, because if we send someone up who's just going to be a toxic brand for independent voters, there's a really good chance we're going to lose again. And that's not something any Republican wants to do.
Back to the current indictment, I want to acknowledge that while a lot of people on both sides of the political aisle are kind of saying this is a weak indictment, there are some people who are supporting it. So who are saying it's time to hold politicians accountable for all of these things. What do you have to say to people who are saying, we should get them for everything?
Oh, well, there's certainly a cohort of Democrats who've been trying to slap the cuffs on Donald Trump since he first launched his presidential campaign. I mean, there has been a hardcore Trump resistance since he started. And these are the people who say we should use the criminal justice system to indict him for anything at any time, anyhow, just because he deserves it. That is not the purpose of the criminal justice system. If Donald Trump hadn't been president, weren't running for president, I don't think this indictment would be occurring. And I think most voters believe that. Now, that's this case. There are other cases coming, the Georgia election case, the documents case, the January 6th case. Any of these may offer more compelling reasons for Donald Trump to find himself in legal jeopardy. But this isn't it. This simply isn't it. A several years old paperwork misdemeanor being contorted into a felony campaign finance case that doesn't even have to do with campaign finances at the state level. It's federal. It's so convoluted. That's why you have so many people saying the case is weak.
Do you think this indictment, though, impacts any of the others potentially?
Not legally necessarily, but I've wondered if it doesn't impact just the overall public opinion about the other cases. But just when you're thinking about someone's political standing, this was the leadoff hitter in the overall effort to, quote unquote, get Donald Trump. And it's pretty weak. And so that's why I think you've heard a lot of pretty smart Democrats on television saying this thing ought to be put on the shelf and we ought to wait for the people in Georgia, wait for the federal government to decide what they're going to do. They know those cases matter more. They know the evidence is better. They know it's far more consequential. And so I think there's a lot of smart Democrats who are pretty chagrined that this is where the case to get Donald Trump started.
Any other final thought or anything else you want to add?
I know this case is interesting and everybody's got opinions on it, but I'm looking to the future. What do these other cases bring? Because I think most Americans think they're actually important. The cases that everyone knows about and that matter to most people have to do with what happened in the 2020 election and its aftermath. And that's what's coming down the hill for Donald Trump. So we'll see. Maybe he won't be indicted for any of those things. He's been, somewhat Teflon in his life. But if he is, I just think most Americans are going to say, okay, this is really important, and I'm going to dig in on this more than I can dig in on this opaque, years old paperwork misdemeanor.
Well, thank you so much to both of our guests today. You can learn more about them in today's show notes on thenewsworthy.com. And be sure to follow both Jamil Jaffer and Scott Jennings on Twitter. We'll, of course, keep you updated on this case and the other news to know each weekday in our regular episodes. Our 10-minute news roundups help you start the day informed every Monday through Friday. So we'll be back on Monday with the latest. Until then, have a great weekend.